The opera ghost really existed. He was not a creature of the imagination of the artists or of the superstition of the managers, nor was he a product of the absurd and impressionable brains of the young ladies of the chorus and the ballet. He existed. When I, Gaston Leroux, began to investigate the matter, I was at once struck by the surprising coincidences between the phenomena ascribed to the ghost and the most extraordinary and fantastic tragedy that ever excited the Parisian upper classes: the kidnapping of Christine Doé, the disappearance of the Vicomte de Chagny, and the death of his elder brother, Count Philippe. And I soon conceived the hypothesis that this tragedy might be explained by the phenomena in question. I was the first one, indeed, I was the only one, to make the connection, as a result of which I was soon following a trail of clues which ultimately uncovered the mysterious and dramatic tale I am now in a position to relate. It was autumn when it all began. For several months there had been nothing discussed at the opera but this ghost in dress clothes, who stalked about the building from top to bottom, like a shadow, who spoke to nobody, to whom nobody dared speak, and who vanished as soon as he was seen, no one knowing how or where. You meet so many men in dress clothes at the opera who are not ghosts. But this dress suit had a peculiarity of its own. It clothed a skeleton. At least, so it was said. And of course, it had a death's head. Was all this serious? The truth is that the idea of the skeleton came from the description of the ghost given by Joseph Bouquet, the chief scene-shifter, who had really seen him. He had run up against him on the little staircase by the footlights, which leads straight down to the labyrinth of cellars. He had seen it for a second, for the ghost had fled. And to anyone who cared to listen to him, he said, "He's extraordinarily thin, and his dress coat hangs on a skeleton frame. His eyes are so deep that you can hardly see the pupils. His skin, which is stretched across the bones like a drumhead, is not white, but dirty yellow. His nose is so little worth talking about that in profile it's actually invisible. And the absence of that nose is a horrible thing to look at. All the hair he has is 3 or 4 long locks on his forehead and behind the ears." This scene-shifter was a serious, sober, steady man, very slow at imagining things. His words were received with interest and amazement, and soon there were other people to say that they too had met a man in dress clothes with a death's head. Eventually it happened to the young ladies of the ballet, who met him when they came off the stage after dancing Polyeucte on the night of the great gala. Panic-stricken, they rushed into the dressing room of La Sorelli, one of the principal dancers, and locked the door. "Come, children, pull yourselves together," said Sorelli, who was of a sceptical nature. "I dare say none of you has really seen the ghost." Yes, we saw him just now," cried one of the girls. And Gabrielle saw him too," cried another. "Only yesterday afternoon, in broad daylight." "Gabrielle? The chorus master?" "Certainly. Gabriel told me so himself. He was in the stage manager's office. Suddenly the door opened, and the Persian entered. You know, the Persian has the evil eye." "Oh, yes," answered the little ballet girls in chorus, warding off ill luck by pointing their forefinger and little finger at the absent Persian. "And you know how superstitious Gabrielle is," continued the storyteller. "Well, the moment the Persian appeared in the doorway, Gabrielle rushed out of the office like a madman, slipped on the staircase, and came down the whole of the first flight on his back.
I was just passing with my mother. We picked him up. He told us what had frightened him. He had seen the ghost, behind the Persian, the ghost with the death's head, just like Joseph Bouquet's description.
There was the sound of heavy and hurried footsteps in the passage, and a breathless voice cried, "Cécile? Cécile, are you there?" One of the girls unlocked the door. A lady, built like a Pomeranian grenadier, burst into the dressing-room and dropped into a vacant armchair. Her eyes rolled madly. "How awful!" she said. "How awful!"
What? What?
"Joseph Bouquet is dead. He was found hanging in the cellars on the 3rd level. The scene shifter found him hanging. When they reached the body, it lay on the floor, and the rope had disappeared."
"It's the ghost!"
blurted out little Giry. All around her, her panic-stricken companions repeated under their breath, "Yes, it must be the ghost." No gala performance had ever equaled the one that took place that night. All the great composers of the day, Gounod, Reyer, Saint-Saëns, Massenet, had conducted their own works in turn. Fauré and Krauss had sung. But the real triumph was reserved for Christine Daae, who revealed her true self for the first time to the astonished and enthusiastic audience. She had begun by singing a few passages from Romeo and Juliet. It was the first time that the young Swedish artiste sang this work of Gounod. Those who heard her say that her voice was seraphic, but this was nothing to the superhuman notes that she gave forth in the prison scene and the final trio in Faust, which she sang in the place of La Carlotta, who was ill. No one had ever heard or seen anything like it. The whole house went mad, rising to its feet, shouting, cheering, clapping, while Christine sobbed and fainted in the arms of her fellow singers and had to be carried to her dressing-room. A few subscribers, however, protested. Why had so great a treasure been kept from them all this time? Till then, Christine Daae had played a good Cybele in Faust to Carlotta's rather too splendidly massive Margarita, and it had needed Carlotta's incomprehensible and inexcusable absence from this gala night for little Daae, at a moment's notice, to show all that she could do in a part of the program reserved for the Spanish diva. The whole thing was a mystery. The Comte de Chagny, standing in his box, listened to all this frenzy and took part in it by loudly applauding. Philippe Georges Marie, Comte de Chagny, was just 41 years of age. He was a great aristocrat and a good-looking man, above middle height, and with attractive features, in spite of his rather cold eyes. Beside him stood his brother, Raoul. He was a little over 21 years of age, and looked 18. He had a small, fair moustache, beautiful blue eyes, and a complexion like a girl's. Philippe, after applauding the Daae, turned to Raoul and saw that he was quite pale. "Don't you see," said Raoul, "that the woman's fainting?" "You look like fainting yourself," said the Count. "What's the matter?" "Let's go," said Raoul. "Where to?" "Let's go and see her. She never sang like that before." The Count gave his brother a curious, smiling glance, and seemed quite pleased. Raoul tore his gloves without knowing what he was doing, and Philippe had much too kind a heart to laugh at him for his impatience. But he now understood why Raoul was absent-minded when spoken to, and why he always tried to turn every conversation to the subject of the opera. They pushed through the crowd of gentlemen, scene-shifters, supers, and chorus girls, Raoul leading the way. Count Philippe followed his brother down the passage that led to Daae's dressing-room, and saw it had never been so crammed as on that evening, when the whole house seemed excited by her success, and also by her fainting fit. For the girl had not yet come to, and the theatre doctor arrived at the same moment as Raoul. "Don't you think, Doctor, that these gentlemen had better clear the room?" asked Raoul coolly. "There's no air in here." "You're quite right," said the doctor, and he sent everyone away except Raoul and the maid. Meanwhile, Christine Daae uttered a deep sigh, then turned her head, saw Raoul, and started. She looked at the doctor, on whom she bestowed a smile, then at her maid, then at Raoul again.
Monsieur? Who are you?
Mademoiselle, replied the young man, going down on one knee and pressing a fervent kiss on the diva's hand.
I am the little boy who went into the sea to rescue your scarf.
Christine again looked at the doctor and the maid, and all three began to laugh. Raoul turned very red and stood up.
Mademoiselle, since you are pleased not to recognize me, I should like to say something to you in private. Something very important. When I'm better. Do you mind?
And her voice shook. Yes, you must go, said the doctor with his pleasantest smile. Let me attend to mademoiselle.
I am not ill now,
said Christine suddenly with strange and unexpected energy. She rose, and passing her hand over her eyelids, said,
Thank you, doctor. I should like to be alone. Please go away, all of you. Leave me.
Outside, the doctor said to Raoul, She is not herself tonight. She is usually so gentle. Then he said good night, and Raoul was left alone in the kindly shadow of a doorway. He felt a terrible pain in his heart, and it was of this that he wished to speak to Daae without delay. Suddenly the dressing-room door opened again, and the maid came out and departed. Hardly breathing, Raoul went up to the dressing-room and prepared to knock, but his hand dropped. He had heard a man's voice in the dressing-room, saying, in a curiously masterful tone, "Christine, you must love me." And Christine's voice, infinitely sad and trembling, as though accompanied by tears, replied,
How can you doubt me, when I sing only for you? Tonight I gave you my soul, and I'm dead.
Your soul is a beautiful thing, child,
replied the man's grave voice,
and I thank you. No emperor ever received so fair a gift. The angels wept tonight.
Raoul heard nothing after that. Nevertheless, he did not go away, but returned to his dark corner, determined to wait for the man to leave the room. At one and the same time, he had learnt what love meant and hatred. He knew that he loved. He wanted to know whom he hated. To his great astonishment, the door opened, and Christine Daae appeared, wrapped in furs, with her face hidden in a lace veil, alone. She closed the door behind her and went on her way. When the passage was once more deserted, Raoul crossed it, opened the door of the dressing-room, went in and shut the door. He found himself in absolute darkness. The gas had been turned out.
There's someone here,
said Raoul with his back against the closed door.
What are you hiding for?
All was darkness and silence. Raoul heard only the sound of his own breathing. He struck a match. Its flame lit the room. There was no one there. Raoul lit the gas jets. He went into the dressing closet, opened the cupboards, hunted about, felt along the walls with his moist hands. Nobody. Nothing.
Am I going mad?
He said. Christine Daae, owing to intrigues to which I shall return later, did not immediately continue her triumph at the opera. After the famous gala night, she showed herself nowhere, and the Vicomte Raoul de Chagny tried in vain to meet her. He wrote to her, asking leave to call upon her. She sent him the following note.
Monsieur, I have not forgotten the little boy who went into the sea to rescue my scarf. I feel that I must write to you today, when I am going to Perros-Guirec in fulfillment of a sacred duty. Tomorrow is the anniversary of the death of my poor father, whom you knew, and who was very fond of you. He's buried there with his violin, in the graveyard of the little church.
Raoul hurriedly consulted a railway guide, dressed as quickly as he could, and jumped into a cab which brought him to the Gare Montparnasse just in time to miss the morning train. He did not recover his spirits until the evening, when seated in his compartment in the Brittany Express. Day was breaking when he alighted at Lannion. He hurried to the coach for Perros-Guirec, where he learned that the previous evening a young lady who looked like a Parisienne had gone to Perros and put up at the inn called the Setting Sun. The nearer he drew to her, the more fondly he remembered the story of the little Swedish singer. There was once a peasant who lived with his family in a little market town not far from Uppsala. This peasant had a little daughter to whom he taught the musical alphabet before she learned how to read. Christine Doe's father was a great musician. Not a fiddler throughout the length and breadth of Scandinavia played as he did. His wife died when Christine was entering upon her 6th year. Then the father took to the road, wandering from fair to fair, strumming his Scandinavian melodies, while his child listened to him in ecstasy, or sang to his playing. One day Professor Valerius heard them and took them to Gothenburg. He maintained that the father was the first violinist in the world, and that the daughter had the makings of a great artist. Her education and instruction were provided for. When Valerius and his wife went to settle in France, they took Doe and Christine with them. Each summer the whole family went to stay at Perros-Guirec in Brittany. At the time of the Breton pilgrimages, Doe went off with his fiddle as in the old days, and was allowed to take his daughter with him. They provided the smallest hamlets with music enough to last them for a year. The people followed them from village to village. One day, a little boy who was out with his governess made her take a longer walk than she intended, for he could not tear himself away from a certain little girl whose pure, sweet voice seemed to bind him to her. They came to the shore, where a high wind blew Christine's scarf out to sea. The little boy ran into the sea and brought her back her scarf. Boy and scarf were soaked through. Christine laughed merrily and kissed the little boy, who was none other than Raoul de Chagny, staying at Lannion with his aunt. At the aunt's request, Doe consented to give the young Vicomte some violin lessons. In this way, Raoul learned to love the same airs that had charmed Christine's childhood. They delighted in stories, and their great treat was in the twilight, when Doe told them the legends of the land of the north. There was one story that began, "Little Lotte thought of everything and nothing. Her hair was gold as the sun's rays, and her soul as clear as her eyes. She wheedled her mother, was kind to her doll, took great care of her frock and her little red shoes and her fiddle, but most of all loved, when she went to sleep, to hear the angel of music." The angel of music played a part in all Monsieur Doe's tales, and he maintained that every great musician, every great artist, received a visit from the angel at least once in his life. No one ever sees the angel, but he is heard by those who are meant to hear him. Then their ears suddenly perceive celestial harmonies, a divine voice, which they remember all their lives. And they cannot touch an instrument or open their mouths to sing without producing sounds which put all other human sounds to shame. Little Christine asked her father if he had heard the angel of music. Monsieur Doe shook his head sadly. Then his eyes lit up as he said, "You will hear him one day, my child. When I am in heaven, I will send him to you." 3 years later they met again at Perros. Professor Valerius was dead, but his widow remained in France with Monsieur Doe and his daughter, who continued to play the violin and sing. When they took leave of each other, Raoul, pressing a kiss on Christine's trembling lips, said, "Mademoiselle, I shall never forget you." Christine devoted herself wholly to her art. She made wonderful progress, and those who heard her prophesied that she would be the greatest singer in the world. Then her father died, and suddenly she seemed to have lost, with him, her voice, her soul, and her genius. The first time that Raoul saw Christine at the opera, he was charmed by the girl's beauty, but was rather surprised that she did not distinguish herself. She seemed to have lost her touch. And then came the revelation of that gala performance, the heavens torn asunder, and an angel's voice heard upon earth for the delight of mankind and the utter conquest of his heart. Perros was reached at last. Raoul walked into the smoky parlour of the setting sun, and saw Christine standing before him, smiling and showing no astonishment. "So you have come," she said. "I felt that I should find you here when I came back from Mass. Someone told me so at church." "Who?" "Why, my poor dead father." There was a silence, and then Raoul asked, "Did your father tell you that I love you and that I cannot live without you?" "Me? You love me? You're dreaming, my friend." There was something in Christine's attitude that struck Raoul as not quite natural. He did not feel any hostility in her, far from it. The sad tenderness in her eyes told him that. But why was this tenderness so sad? "Christine, when you saw me in your dressing room at your feet, reminding you that I had rescued your scarf from the sea, why did you answer me as though you did not know me? And why did you laugh?" Christine stared at him without replying. "You don't answer. Well, I will answer for you. It was because there was someone in the room who was in your way, Christine, someone whom you did not wish to know that you could be interested in anyone else." "If anyone was in my way, my friend," Christine broke in coldly, "if anyone was in my way that evening, it was yourself, and so I told you to leave the room. Yes, so that you might remain with another." "What other do you refer to?" "The man to whom you said, 'I sing only for you. Tonight I gave you my soul, and I am dead.'" "Then you were listening behind the door?" "Yes, because I love you. And I heard everything." Christine clasped her hand to her heart, overcome with indescribable emotion. Her eyes stared before her like a madwoman's. The young man tried to take her in his arms, but she escaped and fled in great disorder. That evening, Raoul climbed the slope behind the village and sat down on the edge of the moor overlooking the sea. It was here, he remembered, that he used to come with little Christine to see the goblins dance at the rising of the moon. He smiled at the thought, and then suddenly a voice behind him said, "Do you think the goblins will come this evening?" It was Christine. "Listen, Raoul," she said. "I have decided to tell you something serious, very serious. Do you remember the legend of the Angel of Music?" "I do indeed," Raoul said. "It was here that your father first told it to us." And it was here that he said, 'When I am in heaven, my child, I will send him to you.' Well, Raoul, my father is in heaven, and I have been visited by the Angel of Music." "I have no doubt of it," replied the young man gravely. "What makes you say that?" "No human being can sing as you sang the other evening without divine intervention. No professor on earth can teach you such accents as those. You have heard the Angel of Music, Christine." "Yes," she said solemnly. "In my dressing room." "In your dressing room?" "Yes. And I have not been the only one to hear him." "Who else heard him, Christine?" "You, my friend. The other evening it was he who was talking when you were listening. It was he who said, 'You must love me.'" Raoul burst out laughing. "What are you laughing at?" "You think you heard a man's voice, I suppose." "Well," said Raoul. His ideas began to grow confused in the face of Christine's determination. But before he could explain, she gave a cry and ran away. Raoul dined alone, in a very gloomy mood. Then he went to his room and tried to read. There was no sound from Christine's room next door. It was about 11:30 when he distinctly heard someone moving with a light, stealthy step, and softly opening his door, he saw Christine slip from her room, disappear along the passage and run down the stairs. Raoul crossed his room and looked through the curtains. Christine's white form stood on the deserted quay. A tree growing against the wall held out its branches to Raoul's impatient arms and enabled him to climb down. He followed Christine as she walked quickly up the road. The church clock struck 12:15, and she began almost to run and continued at this pace till she came to the churchyard. Raoul hid in the shadow of a tree and watched. Christine knelt down by her father's grave, made the sign of the cross, and began to pray. At that moment it struck midnight. At the last stroke, Raoul saw her lift her eyes to the sky and stretch out her arms as though in ecstasy. He was wondering what the reason could be when suddenly he heard the most perfect music. He knew that music. He and Christine had heard it as children. The air was the resurrection of Lazarus, which old Monsieur Doye used to play to the children in his hours of melancholy. But it had never been executed with such divine art, not even by Monsieur Doye. When the music stopped, Christine stood up and walked slowly to the gate. She was so much absorbed that she did not see Raoul as she made her way back towards the inn. Raoul waited. It had occurred to him that the musician might be hiding in the graveyard, and his suspicion seemed to be confirmed when he saw a shadow suddenly glide along the sacristy wall. He ran forward. The shadow had already pushed open the door and entered the church. Raoul caught hold of a corner of its cloak. At that moment they were just in front of the high altar, and the moonbeams fell straight upon them through the stained-glass windows of the apse. The shadow turned round, and Raoul saw a terrible death's head, which darted a look at him from a pair of scorching eyes. He felt as if he were face to face with Satan. In the presence of this unearthly apparition, his heart gave way, his courage failed him, and he remembered nothing more till he recovered consciousness the next morning at the setting sun. He had been discovered, lying on the steps of the high altar. On his return to Paris, Raoul received a letter from Christine, who, fleeing from Perros like a thief in the night, had arrived there before him. "You must have the courage not to see me again. If you love me just a little, do this for me. My life depends on it. Your life depends on it. Your little Christine." Almost immediately, Christine disappeared. A fortnight later, news reached him that she had returned and was singing more superbly than ever. A few days later, Raoul received a letter. He recognized Christine's paper and handwriting. "Go to the masked ball at the opera on the night after tomorrow. At 12 o'clock, be in the little room behind the chimney-piece of the big crush-room. Stand near the door that leads to the rotunda. Wear a white domino, and see that you are well masked. As you love me, do not let yourself be recognized. Christine." The hour of the appointment came at last. Raoul arrived at 11:05. Crossing the big crush-room and escaping from a mad whirl of dancers, he entered the room mentioned in Christine's letter. He found it crammed, but he did not have to wait long. A black domino passed and gave a quick squeeze to the tips of his fingers. "Is that you, Christine?" The black domino turned round and raised her fingers to her lips. As Raoul once more passed through the great crush-room, this time in the wake of his guide, he could not help noticing a group crowding round a person whose cadaverous appearance was causing a sensation. It was a man, dressed all in scarlet, with a huge hat and feathers. From his shoulders hung an immense red velvet cloak, and on this cloak was embroidered in gold letters, "Touch me not. I am Red Death, stalking abroad."
"The death's head of Perros-Guirec,"
Raoul exclaimed. He wanted to dart forward, but the black domino caught him by the arm and dragged him from the crush-room. They went up 2 floors. Here the stairs and corridors were deserted. The black domino opened the door of a private box and beckoned to the white domino to follow her. Burning with impatience, Raoul did so.
"Who is he?"
Raoul demanded.
"This time he shall not escape me." "Who shall not escape you?"
"Who? Why, he.
The man who hides behind that hideous mask of death. The evil genius of the churchyard at Perros. Red Death. In a word, mademoiselle, your friend, your angel of music. But I shall snatch off his mask, look him in the face, and I shall know whom you love and who loves you."
With a tragic gesture, she flung out her 2 arms, fixing a barrier of white flesh against the door.
"In the name of our love, Raoul, you shall not pass."
"You lie, mademoiselle, for you do not love me, and you have never loved me. Alas, you have deceived us all, you and your Red Death. I despise you."
"You will beg my pardon one day for those ugly words, Raoul, and I shall forgive you. I brought you here to tell you, but I cannot tell you now. You would not believe me. You've lost faith in me. Raoul, it is finished."
She spoke in such a despairing voice that the young man began to feel remorse for his cruelty.
"Can't you tell me what all this means? Explain yourself, Christine, I beg of you. Anyone might have been deceived as I was. What is this farce?"
Christine simply took off her mask and said,
"Not a farce, my dear. It is a tragedy."
Raoul now saw her face, and could not restrain an exclamation. A mortal pallor covered those features, and sorrow had furrowed them and traced dark and unspeakably sad shadows under her eyes. She resumed her mask, and went away, forbidding him with a gesture to follow her. He watched her until she was out of sight. Then he also went down among the crowd, hardly knowing what he was doing, with throbbing temples and an aching heart, and as he crossed the dance floor, he asked if anybody had seen Red Death. Yes, everybody had. But Raoul could not find him, and at 2 o'clock in the morning he turned down the passage that led to Christine's dressing-room. He tapped at the door. There was no answer. He entered. The room was empty. A gas jet was burning, turned down low. He heard steps in the passage. He only had time to hide in the inner room, which was separated from the dressing-room by a curtain. Christine entered, took off her mask with a weary movement, and flung it on the table. She sighed, sat down, and let her pretty head fall into her 2 hands. Raoul heard her murmur,
"Poor Eric."
Suddenly she raised her head. She seemed to be listening. Raoul also listened. He heard a voice, a very beautiful, very soft, very captivating voice, a male voice. The voice came nearer and nearer. It came through the wall. It approached. And now the voice was in the room, in front of Christine. Christine rose and addressed the voice as though speaking to someone beside her.
"Here I am, Eric. I'm ready."
Raoul, peeping from behind the curtain, was amazed. He could see no one. The voice without a body went on singing. And certainly Raoul had never in his life heard anything more absolutely and heroically sweet, more
irresistibly triumphant. He began to understand how Christine was able to appear one evening before the stupefied audience with accents of a beauty hitherto unknown, of a superhuman exaltation, while doubtless still under the influence of this mysterious and invisible master. The voice was singing the wedding night song from Romeo and Juliet. Nothing could describe the passion with which it sang the words, "Fate links me to thee for ever and a day." The strains went through Raoul's heart, struggling against the charm that seemed to deprive him of all his will and all his energy and almost all his lucidity. He succeeded in drawing back the curtain and walked to where Christine stood. She herself was moving to the back of the room, the whole wall of which was occupied by a great mirror that reflected her image, but not his, for he was directly behind her. Christine walked towards her image in the glass. The two Christines seemed to touch, and Raoul was suddenly flung back, while an icy blast swept across his face. He saw not 2, but 4, 8, 20 Christines spinning round him. At last, everything stood still again, and he saw himself in the glass. But Christine had disappeared. He rushed up to the glass. He struck the walls. Nobody. The next day, Raoul called at the home of Madame Valerius. Christine herself was seated by the bedside of the old lady. Raoul, seeing Christine there, was dumbfounded. "Well, Monsieur de Chagny," exclaimed Madame Valerius, "don't you recognize our Christine? Her good genius has sent her back to us." "Her good genius!" cried Raoul bitterly. "This disastrous adventure will certainly end by making Christine its victim." "What does this mean?" Madame Valerius demanded. "Is Christine in danger?" "Yes, madame." "And what danger is it, Monsieur de Chagny?" "An impostor is abusing her good faith." "Don't believe him, maman, don't believe him," she said. Then she turned to Raoul. "I am the mistress of my own actions, Monsieur de Chagny. You have no right to control them, and I will beg you to desist henceforth." She emphasized her words with a gesture of her hands, and Raoul turned pale. He had caught sight of a plain gold ring on Christine's finger. "You have no husband, and yet you wear a wedding ring," he said. She swiftly drew back her hand. "It was a present," she said, vainly striving to hide her embarrassment. "Given by one who hopes to make you his wife?" Raoul retorted. "When a man adopts such romantic methods to entice a young girl's affections—" "Raoul, why do you condemn someone about whom you know nothing? I at least know his name. The name of your angel of music, mademoiselle, is Eric." Christine turned as white as a sheet. "Who told you?" "You yourself." "How do you mean?" "When you went to your dressing-room last night, did you not say, 'Poor Eric'?" "This is the second time that you have listened behind the door, Monsieur de Chagny." "I was in the inner room, mademoiselle. I know his name is Eric, and that in some mysterious way he haunts the opera." "Oh, unhappy man," moaned the girl, showing every sign of unspeakable terror. "Unhappy man. Do you want to be killed?" After this, Christine's attitude towards Raoul softened. She let him visit her frequently in her dressing-room at the opera during the day. It was as though she found it difficult to tear herself away from the place. In spite of her success, Raoul saw that she was not happy. In fact, the better she sang, the more melancholy she became. Eloquently he begged her to abandon her present life and go away with him. She did not accede to his request, but she heard him out. The sadder she became, the more readily she listened. Together they wandered about the upper levels of the enormous building. It was as though the real sky, the real flowers, the real earth were forbidden her, and she,
condemned to breathe no other air than that of the theatre. Once, when they were passing before an open trapdoor on the stage, Raoul stopped and said, "You have shown me over the upper part, but there are strange tales told of the lower. Shall we go down?" She caught him in her arms, and in a trembling voice whispered,
"Never. I will not have you go there. Everything that is underground belongs to him."
Suddenly the trapdoor was closed, and so quickly that they did not see the hand that worked it. "Perhaps he was there," said Raoul.
No. He has shut himself up. He's working."
She shivered. "What is he working at?"
"His music. When he is composing, he does not eat, drink, or breathe for days at a time. But it's all the better for us. When he's working, he has no time to amuse himself with trapdoors."
For all that, on the next day and the following days, her agitation increased. At last, one afternoon, she met him with a face so desperately pale that Raoul resolved to go to all lengths to remove her from the terrible influence to which she had surrendered herself.
"I shall remove you from his power, Christine. I swear it. And you shall not think of him any more. Is it possible? I shall hide you in some unknown corner of the world where he cannot come to look for you. You will be safe."
Christine seized Raoul's hands and squeezed them with incredible rapture. This was the encouragement for which he had been praying. The next day, their wanderings took them up to the roof. It was a gorgeous spring evening. There, finally, Christine agreed to follow the course of action so passionately advocated by Raoul. "When the moment comes for you to take me away," she said, "if I refuse to go with you, you must carry me off by force." "Are you afraid that you will change your mind?" "I fear the power of his voice. I fear he will use his voice to drag me with him underground, where he will go on his knees before me and he will cry. Oh, those tears in the two black eye sockets of the death's head. Let us fly at once, Christine. No. It would be too cruel. Let him hear me sing tomorrow evening, and then we will go away. Forever." Raoul said, "Tell me how this all began." "The first time I heard it, I thought that adorable voice was singing in another dressing room. I went out and I looked everywhere, but I could not find it outside my room, whereas it went on steadily inside, and it not only sang, but it spoke to me, like a real man's voice, with this difference, that it was as beautiful as the voice of an angel. I had never forgotten the angel of music whom my father had promised to send to me. I told Madame Valerius about it, and she at once said, 'It must be the angel. At any rate, you can do no harm by asking him.' I did so, and the voice replied that, yes, it was the voice which my father had promised me. It asked leave to give me lessons every day. I agreed, and my progress, by the voice's own order, was kept a secret. It was about then that I saw you, for the first time, in the audience. I never thought of concealing my delight when I reached my dressing room. The voice soon noticed that something had happened. It asked, 'What is the matter?' I saw no reason for concealing the place which you filled in my heart. Then the voice was silent. I called to it, but it did not reply. I begged and entreated, but in vain. I was terrified lest it had gone for good. That night I told Maman Valerius, who said, 'Why, of course, the voice is jealous.' And that Raoul first told me that I loved you. The next day
The voice spoke to me with great sadness and told me plainly that if I must bestow my heart on earth, there was nothing for the voice to do but to go back to heaven. I swore that you were no more to me than a brother, and that my heart was incapable of any earthly love. After that, the hours during which the voice taught me were passed in a divine frenzy, until at last it said to me, "You can now, Christine Doye, give to men a little of the music of heaven." Carlotta did not come to the theatre that night, and I sang with a rapture I had never felt before, and I felt as if my soul were leaving my body. "Oh, Christine," said Raoul, "my heart quivered that night at every accent of your voice." "I felt myself fainting," said Christine. "When I opened my eyes, you were by my side. But the voice was there also, Raoul. That is why I laughed and sent you away. But the voice had recognized you and was jealous. It made scene after scene." "Why did you not rid yourself of this abominable nightmare?" cried Raoul. "He would not let me go. One night I was sitting in my dressing room. Suddenly I heard a long, beautiful wail, which I knew well. It was the plaint of Lazarus when, at the sound of the Redeemer's voice, he begins to open his eyes and see the light of day. And then the voice began to sing the leading phrase, 'Come and believe in me. Whoso believes in me shall live, walk. Whoso hath believed in me shall never die.' I cannot tell you the effect which that music had upon me. It retreated, and I followed. 'Come and believe in me.' I believed in it. I came, and this was the extraordinary thing. My dressing room, as I moved, seemed to lengthen out. It must have been an effect of mirrors, for I had the mirror in front of me, and suddenly I was outside the room without knowing how. I was in a dark passage. I was frightened, and I cried out. Suddenly a hand was laid on mine, a stone-cold, bony thing that seized my wrist and did not let go. I cried again. An arm took me around the waist, and I was dragged towards a little red light. And there I saw that I was in the hands of a man, wrapped in a cloak, and wearing a mask which hid his whole face. I made one last effort. My limbs stiffened, my mouth opened to scream, but a hand closed it, a hand that smelt of death. And I fainted away. When I opened my eyes, a sort of bluey light surrounded us. We were on the edge of a lake. It seemed to be an underground lake in a vast subterranean cavern, a lake whose leaden waters stretched into the distance, into the darkness. I saw a small boat fastened to the bank. My escort lifted me into the boat, jumped in himself, untied the rope, and seized the oars. We slipped across the noiseless water in the dark, and then we touched shore. I was once more taken up into the man's arms. I cried aloud, and then suddenly I was dazzled by a light. I found myself reclining on a chair in the middle of a room that seemed to be decorated with nothing but flowers. The man in the mask went down on his knees before me and said, "Don't be afraid, Christine. You are in no danger." It was the voice. I felt that I had become involved with some terrible person who had mysteriously succeeded in taking up his abode there, under the opera house, 5 stories below the level of the ground. The voice, therefore, belonged to a man, and I began to cry. He must have understood the cause of my tears, for he said to me that it was true. He was not an angel, nor a genius, nor a ghost. He was Eric. Then he sang, and I could not help but listen, and the magic of that voice put me to sleep. When I woke up, I was alone, lying on a sofa in a little bedroom with a mahogany bedstead, lit by a lamp standing on the marble top of an old chest. After a little while, someone tapped on the door 3 times, a key turned in the lock, and Eric entered. He asked me to come to the dining room, where a meal was waiting for us. I sat down, feeling greatly perturbed, but managed to eat a little. Eric said he loved me, but that he would never tell me so unless I gave him leave. He added that our time would be spent in music. After lunch we went into a drawing-room where Eric sat down at a piano. "Let us sing something operatic, Christine, Doy," he said. We at once began the duet in Othello. I sang Desdemona with a despair, a terror which I had never displayed before. As for him, his voice thundered forth his revengeful soul at every note. Eric's black mask made me think of the natural mask of the Moor of Venice. He was Othello himself. And suddenly I felt a need to know the face of the voice, and with a movement which I was utterly unable to control, my fingers tore away the mask. Oh, horror, horror, horror. The echoes of the night thrice moaned the cry, horror, horror, horror. "Raoul," she continued, "you have seen death's heads when they have been dried and withered by the ages, and you saw Red Death stalking about at the masked ball. But their dumb horror was not alive. Imagine, if you can, Red Death's mask suddenly coming to life in order to express, with the 4 black holes of its eyes, nose, and mouth, the mighty fury of a demon, and not a ray of light from the sockets, for you cannot see his blazing eyes except in the dark." I fell back against the wall, and he came up to me. It was as if Eric was before her now, crying, "Look! You want to see? Christine? See. Feast your eyes on my cursed ugliness. Well, are you satisfied now? Don't turn away. Let me touch your hair. When a woman has seen me as you have, she belongs to me. She loves me forever. I am a kind of Don Juan, you know. Why did you want to see my face? When my own father never saw me. When my mother, so as not to see me, presented me with my first mask." Uttering terrible sobs, he crawled away like a snake, closed the door, and left me. "Enough! Enough!" cried Raoul. "I will kill him. I must kill him." Presently I heard the sound of an organ from the next room. The music expressed every emotion, every suffering of which mankind is capable. It intoxicated me. I opened the door. Eric rose as I entered, but dared not turn in my direction. "Eric!" I cried. "Show me your face without fear. I swear that you are the most unhappy and sublime of men. And if ever again I shiver when I look at you, it will be because I am thinking of the splendor of your genius." He believed me. With words of love he fell at my feet. He kissed the hem of my dress and did not see that I closed my eyes. I lied to him. My lies were as hideous as the monster who inspired them, but they were the price of my freedom, and I managed so well that he became my faithful slave. Gradually I gave him confidence, till at last, after a fortnight of this horrible captivity, he believed me when I said, "Let me go, and I will come back." "And you went back?" "Yes, Raoul. And I must tell you that it was not his frightful threats when setting me free that helped me to keep my word, but the harrowing sob which he gave when we parted. Poor Eric, poor Eric! But each of my visits increased my horror of him instead of calming him. Each visit made him mad with love, and I'm so frightened, so frightened." Suddenly a mortal pallor overspread Christine's features. "Oh, heaven! Oh, heaven!" she cried. "I've lost the ring. The golden ring he gave me. When he gave it to me, he said, as long as this ring is on your finger, Eric will remain your friend, but woe betide you if ever you part with it.
They searched everywhere, but in the darkness, the ring was not to be found.
What misfortunes are in store for us now?
Cried Christine. Let us run away at once, Raoul urged. She hesitated. Then she sighed and said,
No, we'll go tomorrow.
They started to make their way down from the roof. Hovering high above, an immense night bird stared down upon them with blazing eyes. Raoul went home, greatly perturbed.
If I don't save her, he said as he went to bed, she's lost, but I will save her.
No sooner had he put out his lamp when a cold sweat poured from his temples. 2 eyes, like blazing coals, had appeared at the foot of his bed. Raoul was no coward, and yet he trembled. He put out a hand towards the table by his bedside. He found the matches and lit his candle. The eyes disappeared. He thought to himself, she told me that his eyes only showed in the dark. And he rose, hunted about, went around the room. He looked under his bed like a child. Then he thought himself absurd, got into bed again, and blew out the candle. The eyes reappeared.
Is that you, Eric? Man? Genius or ghost? Is it you?
He reflected. If it's he, he's on the balcony. Then he ran to the chest of drawers and groped for his revolver. He opened the balcony window, looked out, saw nothing, and closed the window again. He went back, shivering, and put the revolver on the table within his reach. The eyes were still there. Were they between the bed and the window pane? Or behind the pane? That is to say, on the balcony. That was what Raoul wanted to know. He also wanted to know if those eyes belonged to a human being. He wanted to know everything. Calmly, he seized his revolver and took aim. He aimed a little above the 2 eyes. Surely, if they were eyes, and if above those 2 eyes there was a forehead, and if Raoul was not too clumsy, the shot made a terrible noise amid the silence of the slumbering house. Footsteps came hurrying along the passage. Raoul sat up with outstretched arm, ready to fire again if need be. This time the 2 eyes had disappeared. Servants gathered, carrying lights, followed by Count Philippe, terribly anxious. "What is it?" he asked.
I think I've been dreaming, replied Raoul. I fired at 2 stars that kept me from sleeping.
You're raving. You ill? Oh, for God's sake, Raoul, tell me what happened.
No, I'm not raving. Besides, we shall soon see.
Raoul got out of bed, put on a dressing gown and slippers, took a light from the hands of a servant, and, opening the window, stepped out on the balcony. The Count saw that the glass had been pierced by a bullet at a man's height. Raoul was leaning over the balcony with his candle.
"Ah," he said. "Blood. Blood, here, there. More blood. That's a good thing. A ghost who bleeds is less dangerous."
"My dear fellow," said Count Philippe, "you fired at a cat."
"The misfortune is," said Raoul, "that it's quite possible. With Eric, you never know. Is it Eric? Or is it the cat? Is it the ghost? With Eric, you can't tell."
"Well, who is Eric?" asked the Count.
"He's my rival, and if he's not dead, it's a pity."
Raoul explained the predicament in which he found himself, and his plan to save Christine from her perilous situation. To his amazement, his brother refused to support him. He condemned Raoul, accused him of bringing dishonor upon the family name by his association with a singer, and vowed to prevent him from going through with his design. After breakfast the next morning, Philippe sent for his brother. "Raoul," he said, "that little girl has turned your head with her ghost stories. You're making us ridiculous. Renounce this madness."
"Goodbye, Philippe,"
said Raoul. "Have you quite made up your mind? You're going tonight? With her?" No reply. "Surely you won't do anything so foolish. Mind you, I know how to prevent you."
"Goodbye, Philippe,"
Raoul repeated, and left the house. Raoul devoted the whole day to his preparations for flight. The horses, the carriage, the coachman, the provisions, the luggage, the money required for the journey, the road to be taken, all this had to be settled and provided for, and it occupied him until 9 o'clock at night. At 9 o'clock, a travelling barouche, with the curtains of its windows close drawn, took its place on the rotunda side of the opera. In front of this travelling carriage were 3 coaches, belonging respectively to Carlotta, who had suddenly returned to Paris, to Sorelli, the dancer, and at the head of the rank, to the Count Philippe de Chagny. They were presenting Faust, as it happened, to a splendid house that night. The aristocracy of the Faubourg was magnificently represented. Count Philippe sat alone in his box, and his brother's absence gave rise to any amount of whispering behind the ladies' fans. Philippe kept his eyes fixed on the stage, but his thoughts appeared to be far away.
"I wish I could but know who was he that addressed me, if he was noble, or at least what his name is."
Christine sang the words, but her voice was a shadow of what had come to be expected of her. The heavy burden of her situation had undermined her confidence. She was confused. She trembled. She felt on the verge of a breakdown. Just then, Carlotta made her entrance in a box facing the stage, a sensational entrance. Poor Christine raised her eyes. She recognized her rival. She thought she saw a sneer on her lips. That saved her. She forgot everything in order to triumph once more. From that moment the prima donna sang with all her heart and soul. She tried to surpass all that she had done until then, and she succeeded. In the last act, when she began the invocation to the angels, she made all the members of the audience feel as though they too had wings. In the center of the amphitheater, a man stood up and remained standing, facing the singer. It was Raoul. And Christine, her arms outstretched, her throat filled with music, the glory of her hair falling over her bare shoulders, uttered the divine cry, "Holy angel in heaven blessed, my spirit longs with thee to rest." It was at this moment that the stage was suddenly plunged into darkness. The spectators hardly had time to utter a sound of stupefaction before the gaslights lit the stage again. But Christine Doye was no longer there. Raoul, still standing up in the amphitheater, had given a cry. Count Philippe had sprung to his feet in his box. Raoul hurriedly left his seat. The Count disappeared from his box, and while the curtain was lowered, the subscribers rushed to the door that led behind the scenes. The rest of the audience waited amid the hubbub. Raoul rushed onto the stage in a mad fit of love and despair. "Christine! Christine!" he moaned, calling to her as he felt that she must be calling to him from the depths of that dark pit to which the monster must have carried her. "Christine! Christine!" Hideous thoughts flashed through his congested brain. Of course, Eric must have discovered their secret, must have known that Christine had played him false. What a vengeance would be his! Raoul ran to the singer's dressing room. "Christine! Christine!" Bitter tears scorched Raoul's eyelids as he saw, scattered over the furniture, the clothes which his beloved was to have worn at the hour of their flight. Why, oh, why had she refused to leave earlier? Why had she delayed? Raoul ran upstairs 4 steps at a time, ran downstairs, rushed through the whole of the business side of the opera house, found himself once more in the light of the stage. He saw a group of men and asked, "I beg your pardon, gentlemen, but could you tell me where Christine Doye is?" At the same moment, the stage buzzed with a new sound, and amid a crowd of men in evening dress, all talking and gesticulating together, appeared a man who seemed very calm and displayed a pleasant face, crowned with curly hair and lit up by a pair of wonderfully clear blue eyes. Mercier, the acting manager, drew Raoul's attention to him. This is the gentleman to whom you should put your question, monsieur. Let me introduce Monsieur Mifroid, the commissaire of police.
Ah! Monsieur le Vicomte Raoul de Chagny. Delighted to meet you, monsieur, said the commissaire. Would you mind coming with me?
He led the way toward an empty office. As Raoul followed, a hand was laid on his shoulder, and he heard these words spoken in his ear. Eric's secrets concern no one but himself. Raoul turned round with a stifled exclamation. The hand that had been laid on his shoulder was now placed on the lips of a person with an ebony skin, with eyes of jade, and with an astrakhan cap on his head. The Persian. Raoul recognized this mysterious creature, for his brother had once pointed him out, saying that nothing was known about him except that he was a Persian, and that he lived in a little flat in the Rue de Rivoli. The stranger continued the gesture, recommending discretion, and then, at the moment when the astonished Raoul was about to ask the reason for his mysterious intervention, bowed and disappeared.
Come, Monsieur de Chagny, let us talk seriously, remonstrated Commissaire Mifroid after Raoul had told his story. You really believe that Mademoiselle Christine Doye has been carried off by a ghost called Eric?
Yes.
Do you know this Eric?
Yes.
You have met him?
Yes.
Where?
In a churchyard.
Oh, of course, the usual haunt for ghosts.
Monsieur, said Raoul, I can quite understand how absurd my replies seem to you, but I beg you to believe that I am in full possession of my faculties. The safety of the person dearest to me in the world is at stake. I should like to convince you in a few words, for time is pressing and every minute is valuable. The door opened and a man entered, curiously dressed in a huge frock coat and a tall hat. He went up to the commissaire and spoke to him in a whisper. During this exchange, Monsieur Mifroid did not take his eyes off Raoul. At last, addressing him, he said, Monsieur, we have talked enough about the ghost. We will now talk a little about yourself, if you have no objection. You were to carry off Mademoiselle Christine Doye tonight, after the performance. Yes, Monsieur le Commissaire.
Your carriage is still outside the rotunda, awaiting your orders, is it not?
Yes, Monsieur le Commissaire.
Did you know that there were 3 other carriages there in addition to yours?
I did not pay the least attention.
They were the carriages of Mademoiselle Sorelli, of Carlotta, and of your brother, Monsieur le Comte de Chagny.
Very likely.
Though your carriage and Sorelli's and Carlotta's are still there, Monsieur le Comte de Chagny's carriage is gone.
Well, this has nothing to do with...
I beg to differ. Was not Monsieur le Comte opposed to your liaison with Mademoiselle Doye?
That is a matter that only concerns the family.
Monsieur de Chagny, allow me to inform you that your brother has been cleverer than you. It is he who has carried off Christine Doye.
You sure?
Immediately after Mademoiselle Doye's disappearance, procured by means which we have still to ascertain, he flung himself into his carriage and drove straight across Paris at a furious pace and out of the city by the Brussels road.
Oh, cried the young man. I shall catch them. And he rushed out of the office. At the end of the passage, a tall figure blocked his way. Where are you going in such a hurry, Monsieur de Chagny? Asked a voice. Raoul recognized the astrakhan cap. It's you, the Persian, he cried. You who know Eric's secrets and do not wish me to speak of them. The man with the ebony skin and eyes of jade bent over Raoul. Eric's secret is also Christine Doye's, and to talk about one is to talk about the other. That is why I hope you have not betrayed Eric. Oh, sir, said Raoul, you seem to know about many things that interest me, and yet I have no time to listen to you. Once more, Monsieur de Chagny, where are you going in such a hurry?
Cannot you guess? To Christine Doye's assistance. Then, sir, stay here. For Christine Doye is here.
Sir, said Raoul to the Persian, can you do anything to help me? I mean, to help Christine Doye. I think so, Monsieur de Chagny. What can you do? Try and take you to her, and to him. I place myself entirely in your hands. How should I not believe you, when you are the only one to believe me? Come, said the Persian, and led him down passages which Raoul had never seen before. The two men found themselves in front of a door, which the Persian opened with a master key. Across the corridor was Christine Doye's dressing room. How well do you know the opera? Raoul asked. Not as well as he does, said the Persian, and pushed the young man into the dressing room. There was the sound of someone stirring in the lumber room next door, and a few seconds later a finger tapped at the door. Come in, said the Persian. A man entered. He bowed, took a richly carved case from under his coat, put it on the dressing table, bowed once again, and left. The Persian opened the case. It contained a pair of pistols. When Christine Doye was carried off, sir, I sent word to my servant Darius to bring me these. Handing one of the pistols to Raoul, he added, You love Christine Doye, do you not? I worship the ground she walks on. But you, sir, who do not love her, why are you ready to risk your life for her? You must certainly hate Eric. No, sir, said the Persian sadly. I do not hate him. I do not understand, said Raoul. I find in you the same inexplicable pity for him that drove me to despair when I saw it in Christine. The Persian fetched a stool and set it against the wall facing the great mirror that filled the whole of the opposite partition. Then he climbed on the stool, and with his nose to the wallpaper seemed to be looking for something. Ah, he said after a long search. I have it. Raising his finger above his head, he pressed against a corner in the pattern of the paper. Then he jumped off the stool. In half a minute, he said, we shall be on his track. The Persian crossed the whole length of the dressing room and felt the great mirror. Are we going out by the mirror? Asked Raoul. Like Christine did. So you knew that she went out by the mirror? She did so before my eyes, sir, said Raoul. I was hidden behind the curtain of the inner room, and I saw her vanish not by the glass, but in the glass. And what did you do? I thought it was an aberration of my senses, a mad dream. Or some new fancy of the ghosts, chuckled the Persian. Ah, Monsieur de Chagny would that we had to deal with a ghost. If you watch, he continued, you will see the mirror rise an inch or two and then shift an inch from left to right. It will then be on a pivot and will swing round. We shall do all that is humanly possible, sir, but he may outwit us. He commands the walls, the doors, and the trapdoors. In my country he was known as the trapdoor lover. But why do these walls obey him alone? Raoul asked. He did not build them. Yes, sir. That is just what he did do. The Persian pointed to the glass. Their reflection shivered, as in a rippling sheet of water. The Persian drew Raoul to his chest, and suddenly the mirror turned in a blinding glare of cross lights. It turned like a revolving door, carrying Raoul and the Persian with it, hurling them from the light into the deepest darkness. The wall behind them, having completed its circle, closed again, and the two men stood motionless for a moment, holding their breath. At last,
Raoul heard the Persian slip to his knees and feel for something in the dark. Suddenly the gloom was penetrated by a small, dark lantern. The little red disc was turned in every direction, as Raoul saw that the floor, the walls, and the ceiling were all made of planking. It must have been the normal road taken by Eric to reach Christine's dressing room and impose upon her innocence. The Persian went down on his knees again and put the lantern to the ground. He seemed to be working at the floor. Suddenly he turned off his light. Then Raoul heard a faint click and saw a very pale, luminous square in the floor of the passage. It was as though a window had opened onto the opera cellars, which were still dimly lit. The Persian attached the lantern to his belt. "Follow me," he said, "and do all that I do." Then Raoul saw him lower himself into the opening, hang by his hands from the rim, and drop into the cellar below. In his turn, Raoul hung from the trap with both hands. "Let go," said a voice, and Raoul dropped into the arms of the Persian. The faint light was just enough to enable Raoul to distinguish the shape of things around him. He tried to ask a question, but the Persian's hand was on his mouth. After listening for a long while, the Persian made a sign to Raoul. "Silence," he whispered, "and follow me." The cellars of the opera are enormous, and they are 5 in number. They went down, and then down again, their progress still lit by flickering, widely spaced lamps. The further they went, the more precautions the Persian seemed to take. Once they reached the 3rd cellar, however, he seemed to enjoy a greater sense of security. They waited for 5 minutes. Then the Persian signaled to Raoul to follow him, but no sooner had they set off than he stopped him with another gesture. Something moved in the gloom before them. A head of fire came towards them. At a man's height, but with no body attached to it. The face shed fire. It looked like a flame shaped as a man's face. "Come, let us run," said the Persian. "It is safer." And they fled down the long passage that opened before them and down some stairs that brought them to a still lower level. They became conscious of a strange noise, of which they could not guess the nature. It seemed to approach with the fiery face. A noise as though thousands of nails were being scraped against a blackboard. The Persian and Raoul flattened themselves against the wall, and the fiery face came on, with its noise, came level with them, and the 2 companions felt their hair stand on end with horror, for they now knew what the 1,000 noises meant. They came in little scurrying waves, and the little waves passed between their legs, climbed up their legs irresistibly, and Raoul and the Persian could no longer restrain their cries of horror, dismay, and pain. And their hands went down to their legs to push back the waves, which were full of little legs and nails and claws and teeth. The head of fire turned and spoke to them. "Don't move! Don't move! I am the rat catcher! Let me pass with my rats!" And the head of fire disappeared, vanished in the darkness, dragging with him the waves of scratching rats. Raoul and the Persian breathed again, though still trembling. "Are we very far from the lake, sir?" asked Raoul. "Take me to the lake." "One piece of advice, sir," said the Persian. "Never go near the lake." "But then, what are we here for?" asked Raoul, in a transport of fever, impatience, and rage. The Persian tried to calm the young man. "We have only one means of saving Christine Dore, believe me, which is to enter the house unseen by the monster." "And how can one enter the house on the lake without crossing the lake?" "From the 3rd cellar,
from which we were so unluckily driven away by the rat-catcher. We will go back there now, sir. I will show you the exact spot where we can enter. It is between a set piece and a discarded scene from the Roi de Lahore, exactly at the spot where Joseph Bouquet, the head scene shifter, died. Come, sir. Take courage and follow me.
Eventually they reached the huge cellars below the stage. They must have been at an extremely great depth, for when the opera house was originally constructed, the earth was dug out at 50 feet below the water that lay beneath the whole of that part of Paris. The Persian led the way to a little staircase. They went up, stopping at each step, peering into the darkness and the silence till they came to the third cellar. Here the Persian motioned to Raoul to go down on his knees, and in this fashion they reached the end wall. Against this wall stood a large discarded scene from the Roi de Lahore. Close to this scene was a set piece, and between the two was just room for a body, for the body which was found hanging there one day, the body of Joseph Bouquet. The Persian, still kneeling, stopped and listened. At last he made up his mind to act. He slipped between the set piece and the scene, with Raoul close upon his heels. With his hand the Persian felt the wall. Raoul saw him lean heavily upon it, and then a stone gave way, revealing a hole in the wall. Still on his knees, the Persian wriggled through the hole. Raoul followed him. The opening was very narrow. The Persian stopped almost at once. Raoul heard him feeling the stone around him. Then he used the dark lantern again, examined something beneath him, and immediately extinguished the lantern. "We will have to drop a few yards," he whispered, without making a noise. "Take off your boots." The Persian took off his own shoes, crawled a little further, then turned right round and whispered, "We're there. I'm going to hang by my hands from the edge of the stone and let myself drop into his house. You must do exactly the same. Do not be afraid." Raoul soon heard the dull sound of the Persian's fall, and moving forward, dropped down in his turn. He felt himself clasped in the Persian's arms. "Shh," said the Persian. The darkness was thick around them, the silence heavy and terrible. Then the Persian lifted the lantern, sweeping the rays over the floor. He stooped and picked up something, a sort of cord, which he examined for a second and flung away with horror. "The Punjab lasso." "What is it?" asked Raoul. "It might very well be the rope by which the man Bouquet was hanged." He moved the little red disc of his lantern over the walls. He lit up a curious thing, the trunk of a tree which seemed still quite live with its leaves, and the branches of the tree ran right up the walls and disappeared in the ceiling. Because of the weakness of the lamp's beam, it was difficult to make out the appearance of things. They saw part of a branch, and a leaf, and another leaf, and next to it, nothing at all. Nothing but the ray of light that seemed to reflect itself. Raoul passed his hand over that nothing, over that reflection. "The wall is a looking-glass," he said. "Yes, a looking-glass," said the Persian. "We have dropped into the torture chamber."
In their desperate search for Christine, Raoul and the Persian have found themselves in Eric's mirrored torture chamber.
What the Persian knew of this torture chamber, and what there befell him and his companion, I, Gaston Leroux, shall tell in his own words, as set down in a manuscript which he left behind him, and which I recount verbatim.
"It was the first time," he wrote, "that I had entered the house on the lake. After I first learned that he had taken up his permanent abode at the opera, I often begged the trapdoor lover, as we used to call Eric in my country, to open its mysterious doors to me. He always refused. Eric, I should explain, was born in a small town not far from Rouen, the son of a master mason. His ugliness was a subject of horror and terror to his parents, and he ran away from home at an early age. For a time he frequented the fairs, where a showman exhibited him as the living corpse. He seems to have crossed the whole of Europe, from fair to fair, and to have completed his strange education as an artist and magician at the very fountainhead of art and magic among the gypsies. He sang as nobody on this earth had ever sung before. He practiced ventriloquism, by means of which he was one day to make such an impression on Mademoiselle Douay. He performed conjuring tricks so extraordinary that the caravans returning to Asia talked of nothing else. In this way his reputation penetrated the walls of the palace at Mazenderan, where the little Sultana, the favourite of the Shah-in-Shah, was boring herself to death. A fur trader told of the marvels which he had seen performed in Eric's tent. The trader was summoned to the palace, and the Daroga of Mazenderan was ordered to question him. A Daroga is the title of the chief of police, and I had the honour to hold that high office. As a result of my report to the Sultana, I was instructed to go and find Eric. I brought him to Persia, where he was guilty of not a few horrors, for he seemed not to know the difference between good and evil. He took part calmly in a number of political assassinations, and he turned his diabolical inventive powers against the Emir of Afghanistan, who was at war with the Persian Empire. The Shah took a liking to him. For some time Eric's will was law. This was the time of the rosy hours of Mazenderan. Eric had very original ideas on the subject of architecture, and thought out a palace, much as a conjurer contrives a trick casket. The Shah ordered him to construct an edifice of this kind. Eric did so, and the building was so ingenious that His Majesty was able to move about in it unseen and to disappear, if he so wished, without a possibility of the trick being discovered. When the Shah-in-Shah found himself the possessor of this gem, he reflected that, as long as Eric was alive, there would be someone who knew the secret of the wonderful palace. If that secret fell into the hands of the Shah's enemies, who knows what might result? Eric's death was therefore decided upon, together with that of all the labourers who had worked under his orders. The implementation of this abominable decree devolved upon me as Daroga of Mazenderan. Eric had shown me some slight services and provided me with many a hearty laugh. In return, I saved his life by providing him with the means of escape, but I nearly paid with my head for my generosity. Fortunately for me, a corpse, half devoured by birds of prey, was found on the shore of the Caspian Sea, and was taken for Eric's body, because friends of mine had dressed the remains in Eric's clothes. I was let off with the loss of the imperial favour, the confiscation of my property, and an order of perpetual banishment. As I had a distant connection with the Shah's family, however, I continued to receive a small allowance of a few 100 francs a month from the Persian treasury, and on this I came to live in Paris. As for Eric, he went to Asia Minor and thence to Constantinople, where he entered the Sultan's employment. In explanation of the services which he was able to render a monarch haunted by perpetual terrors, I need only say that it was Eric who constructed all the famous trapdoors and secret chambers and mysterious strong-boxes which were found at Yildiz Kiosk after the last Turkish Revolution. He also invented those automata, resembling the Sultan in all respects, which made people believe that the commander of the faithful was awake in one place, when in fact he was elsewhere and asleep. Of course, he had to leave the Sultan's service for the same reason that forced him to fly from Persia. He knew too much. He made his way back to France, where, tired of his adventurous and monstrous life, he became a building contractor. He tendered for part of the foundations of the opera. His estimate was accepted. When he found himself in the cellars of the enormous playhouse, his artistic, fantastic, wizard nature resumed the upper hand. Besides, was he not as ugly as ever? He dreamt of creating for his own use a dwelling unknown to the rest of the earth, where he could hide from men's eyes for all time. Knowing all this, for I had stumbled upon his secret soon after he arrived in Paris, my alarm was great when I saw that the room into which Monsieur le Vicomte de Chagny and I had dropped was an exact copy of the torture chamber of Mazenderan, and at my feet I had found the Punjab lasso, which I had been dreading finding all the evening. I was convinced that this rope had already done duty around the neck of Joseph Bouquet, the scene-shifter, who must have caught Eric one evening working his secret stone entrance in the third cellar. Joseph probably tried it for himself, fell into the torture chamber, and only left it after having been hanged. I could well imagine Eric dragging the body to the scene from the Roi de Lahore, and hanging it there as a warning to increase the superstitious terror of the ghost. That was to help him in guarding the approaches to his lair. Then, upon reflection, Eric went back to fetch the Punjab lasso, which is very curiously made out of catgut, and which might have set an examining magistrate thinking. That explains the disappearance of the rope. And now I discovered the lasso at our feet in the torture chamber. I am no coward, but cold sweat covered my forehead as I moved the little red disc of my lantern over the walls. Monsieur de Chagny noticed it and asked, "What is the matter, sir?" I made him a violent sign to be silent. We were in the middle of a small six-cornered room, the sides of which were covered with mirrors from floor to ceiling. In the corners we could clearly see the little segments intended to turn on their drums. Yes, I recognized them, and I recognized the iron tree in the corner fixed in one of those segments, the iron tree with its iron branch, for the hanged man. I seized my companion's arm. The Vicomte de Chagny was all a-quiver, eager to shout to his betrothed that he was bringing her help. I feared that he would not be able to contain himself. Suddenly we heard noises on our left. It sounded like a door opening and shutting in the next room, and then came a dull moan. Then we distinctly heard the words,
You must make your choice. The wedding mass or the requiem mass?
I recognized the voice of the monster. I was persuaded that Eric was unaware of our presence in the house. The important thing was not to let him find out, and I dreaded nothing so much as the impulsiveness of Raoul de Chagny, who wanted to rush through the walls to Christine Doye, whose moans we continued to hear at intervals.
The requiem mass is not at all cheerful,
Eric's voice resumed.
Whereas the wedding mass, you can take my word for it. It is magnificent. I can't go on living like this, like a mole in a burrow. My composition, my Don Juan triumphant, is finished. And now I want to live like everybody else. I want to have a wife like everybody else and to take her out on Sundays. I have invented a mask that makes me look like anybody. People will not even turn round to stare at me. You will be the happiest of women, and we will sing all by ourselves till we swoon away with delight. You're crying. You're afraid of me. And yet, I'm not really wicked. Love me, and you shall see. All I wanted was to be loved for myself. If you loved me, I should be gentle as a lamb. And you could do anything you pleased with me.
Soon the moans that accompanied this sort of love's litany increased and increased. I have never heard anything more despairing. Monsieur de Chagny and I recognized that this terrible lamentation came from Eric himself. Christine seemed to stand, dumb with horror, without strength to cry out, while the monster went on. Then, 3 times over, Eric fiercely bewailed his fate.
You don't love me. You don't love me. You don't love me.
And then, more gently,
Why do you cry? You know it gives me pain to see you cry.
A silence. Each silence gave us fresh hope. We said to ourselves, perhaps he has left Christine behind the wall. and we thought only of the possibility of informing her of our presence, unknown to the monster. Suddenly the silence in the next room was disturbed by the ringing of a bell, and then Eric's voice of thunder.
Somebody ringing! Who has come bothering me now? Wait for me here. I'm going to open the door.
Steps moved away. A door closed. I had no time to think of the fresh horror that was perhaps being prepared. I disregarded the fact that the monster was probably only going out to perpetrate a fresh crime. I understood but one thing. Christine was alone behind the wall. The Vicomte de Chagny was already calling to her. "Christine! Christine!" A faint voice reached us. "I'm dreaming," it said. "Christine! Christine, it is I! Raoul!" A silence. "Answer me, Christine! In heaven's name, if you're alone, answer me!" "Raoul?" "Yes! Yes, it is I. It is not a dream. Christine, trust me. We're here to save you. But be prudent. When you hear the monster, warn us." Then Christine told us in a few hurried words that Eric had gone quite mad with love, and that he had decided to kill everybody and himself with everybody if she did not consent to become his wife. He had given her till 11 o'clock the next evening for reflection. It was the last respite. She must then choose, as he said, between the wedding mass and the requiem. And Eric had then uttered a phrase which Christine did not quite understand.
Yes or no? If your answer is no, everybody will be dead and buried.
But I understood the sentence perfectly, for it corresponded in a terrible manner with my own dreadful thought. "Can you tell us where Eric is?" I asked. She replied that he must have left the house. "Could you make sure?" "No. I'm fastened. I cannot stir a limb." When we heard this, Monsieur de Chagny and I gave a yell of fury. Our safety, the safety of all three of us, depended on the girl's liberty of movement. "But where are you?" asked Christine. "There are only 2 doors out of this room. A door through which Eric comes and goes, and another which he calls the most dangerous of doors, the door of the torture chamber." "That is where we are," Raoul replied. "You're in the torture chamber? Raoul, fly. Eric will soon have gone completely mad. You must fly." "Christine," said the young man, "we will go from here together, or die together." But Christine Doye said, "Shh! I hear something. It is he. Go away. Go back the way you came." I turned the rays of the dark lantern upwards, looking for the hole through which we had entered. There was no hole. Somehow the stone had closed of itself. "We could not go, even if we wanted to," I said. Whispered Christine. Heavy steps dragged slowly on the other side of the wall, stopped, and then made the floor creak once more. The Persian was continuing with his story. Next came a tremendous sigh, followed by a cry of horror from Christine, and we heard Eric's voice.
"I beg your pardon for letting you see a face like this. What a state I'm in, am I not? It is the other's fault. Why did he ring? He will never do so again."
"Eric, unloose my bonds." The footsteps dragged along the floor once more. Eric's voice.
"After all, since we're to die together, yes, I've had enough of this life, you know. Don't move. I will release you. You're looking at me because I'm all wet? You know, the man who rang the door just now, I wonder if he's still ringing. At the bottom of the lake. There, turn round. You're free now. Oh, Christine, look at your poor dear wrists. Tell me, have I hurt them?"
At that the Viscount could not help uttering an exclamation of impotent rage.
"Hello, what's that?"
said the monster.
"Did you hear that, Christine?"
No, I heard nothing."
"I thought I heard a cry."
"Cry? You're going mad. Eric,
Whom do you expect to utter a cry in this house? I myself cried out because you hurt me. I heard nothing apart from that. Eric's voice.
I don't like the way you said that. You're trembling, you're excited. You're lying. There was a cry. There was a cry. There's someone in the torture chamber. Ah, I understand now.
There's no one here, Eric.
I understand.
No one.
The man you want to marry, perhaps?
I don't want to marry anyone. You know I don't. We heard a nasty chuckle, and then that which I feared above all things began. Automatically, we were suddenly flooded with light. Yes, on our side of the wall, everything seemed aglow. We heard nothing but the monster's laughter. And then there was the sound of a body falling on the floor and being dragged along, and then nothing more around us save the scorching silence of the tropics in the heart of an equatorial forest. I have said that the room in which Monsieur le Vicomte de Chagny and I were imprisoned was a regular hexagon lined throughout with mirrors. The invention belongs entirely to Eric, who built the first room of this kind under my eyes at the time of the rosy hours of Mazenderan. A decorative object such as a column, for instance, was placed in one of the corners and immediately produced a whole of 1,000 columns, for thanks to the mirrors the real room was multiplied by 6 hexagonal rooms, each of which, in its turn, was multiplied indefinitely. But the little Sultana soon tired of this childish illusion, whereupon Eric altered his invention into a torture chamber. For the architectural motif placed in one corner, he substituted an iron tree. This tree, with its painted leaves, was absolutely true to life, and was made of iron, so as to resist all the attacks of the patient imprisoned in the torture chamber. We shall see how the forest scene thus obtained was twice altered into 2 other scenes, the transition produced instantaneously by means of the automatic rotation of the drums or rollers in the corners. These were divided into 3 sections, fitting into the angles of the mirrors, and each supporting a decorative scheme that came into sight as the roller revolved upon its axis. When the ceiling lit up and the forest became visible around us, the Viscount's stupefaction was immense. That impenetrable forest, with its innumerable trunks and branches, threw him into a terrible state of consternation. He passed his hands over his forehead, as though to drive away a dream. My attention was especially attracted not so much to the scene as to the mirrors that produced it. These mirrors were marked and scratched, in spite of their solidity, and this proved to me that the torture chamber in which we now were had already served a purpose. Yes, some wretch had certainly fallen into this mortal illusion, and, mad with rage, had kicked against those mirrors which continued to reflect his agony, and the branch of the tree on which he had put an end to his own sufferings was arranged in such a way that before dying he had seen for his last consolation 1,000 men writhing in his company. Yes, Joseph Bouquet had been through all this. Were we to die as he had done? I abandoned any idea of returning to the passage which had brought us to that accursed chamber. I did not attempt to shift the stone, for the simple reason that to do so was out of the question. We had dropped from too great a height into the torture chamber. There was only one possible escape route, the opening into the room in which Eric and Christine had been. But, although this outlet looked like an ordinary door on their side, it was absolutely invisible to us. We must therefore try to open it without even knowing where it was. When I heard the monster dragging the poor girl away lest she should interfere with our tortures, I resolved to set to work without delay, but I had first to calm Monsieur de Chagny, who was already walking about like a madman, uttering incoherent cries. The snatches of conversation which he had caught between Christine and the monster had contributed not a little to drive him beside himself. Add to that the shock of the magic forest and the scorching heat, an ingenious electrical system which was beginning to make the perspiration stream down his temples, and his state of mind is understandable. He shouted Christine's name, brandished his pistol, knocked his forehead against the glass in his endeavours to rush down the glades of the elusive forest. In short, the torture was beginning to work its spell upon a brain unprepared for it, I did my best to induce the poor Viscount to see reason. We are in a room, sir, a little room. That is what you must keep saying to yourself, and we shall leave the room as soon as we have found the door. I promised that if he let me act without disturbing me by shouting and walking up and down, I would discover the trick of the door in less than an hour's time. Forgetting the forest, I tackled a glass panel and fingered it in every direction, hunting for the spot which I must press in order to turn the door in accordance with Eric's system of pivots. This spot might be a mere speck on the glass, a speck no larger than a pea, under which the spring lay hidden. I had been working like this for half an hour, and had finished 3 panels, when I turned round on hearing a muttered exclamation from the Viscount. "I'm stifling," he said. "Do you think you will find the spring soon? If you are much longer about it, we shall be roasted alive." I returned to my panel, after giving him a word of encouragement, but I had made the mistake of taking a few paces while speaking, and in the tangle of the elusive forest I was no longer able to make sure of the panel. I had to begin all over again, at random, feeling, fumbling, groping. Now the fever laid hold of me in my turn, for I found nothing, absolutely nothing. We were utterly lost in the forest, without an outlet, a compass, a guide, or anything. I knew what awaited us if nobody came to our aid, or if I did not find the spring. But look as I might, I found nothing but branches, beautiful branches that stood straight up before me or spread gracefully over my head. But they gave no shade. And this was natural enough, as we were in an equatorial forest, with the sun right above our heads, an African forest. I continued to offer a moral resistance, but Monsieur de Chagny seemed to me quite gone. He was convinced that he had been walking in the forest for 3 days and nights without stopping, looking for Christine Dore. From time to time he thought he saw her, behind the trunk of a tree, or gliding between the branches, and he called to her with words of supplication that brought the tears to my eyes. And then at last, "Ah, how thirsty I am," he cried in delirious accents. I, too, was thirsty. My throat was on fire, and yet, squatting on the floor, I went on, hunting for the spring of the invisible door, especially as it was dangerous to remain in the forest as evening drew nigh. Already the shades of night were beginning to surround us. It had happened very quickly. Night falls quickly in tropical countries, suddenly, with hardly any twilight. Now, night in the forest of the equator is always dangerous, particularly when, like ourselves, one has not the materials for a fire to keep off the beasts of prey. I did indeed try for a moment to break off the branches, which I would have lit with my dark lantern, but I knocked against the mirrors and remembered in time that we had only images of branches to deal with. The heat did not diminish with nightfall. On the contrary, it was now still hotter under the blue rays of the moon. I urged the Viscount to hold his pistol ready to fire and not to stray from camp, while I went on looking for my spring. Suddenly we heard a lion roar a few yards away. "Oh!" whispered the Viscount. "He's quite close. Don't you see him? There, through the trees, in that thicket. If he roars again, I will fire." And the roars were repeated, louder than before, and the Viscount did fire, but I do not think that he hit the lion. He only smashed a mirror, as I perceived the next morning. We must have covered a good distance during the night, for we suddenly found ourselves on the edge of the desert, an immense desert of sand, stones, and rocks. Tired out, I flung myself down beside the Viscount, for I had had enough of looking for springs which I could not find. Dawn broke. We were beginning literally to die, of heat, hunger, and thirst, of thirst especially. At last I saw Monsieur de Chagny raise himself on his elbow and point to a spot on the horizon. He had discovered an oasis. Yes, far in the distance was an oasis with limpid water which reflected the iron tree. Tush! It was the scene of the mirage. I recognized it at once, the worst of all the 3 scenes. No one had been able to fight against it. No one. I did my utmost to keep my head and not hope for water, because I knew that if a man hoped for water, and if after hoping for water he struck against the mirror, then there was but one thing for him to do, to hang himself on the iron tree with a Punjab lasso. I knew why the iron tree had returned. So I cried to Monsieur de Chagny, "It's a mirage! It's a mirage! Don't believe in the water! It's another trick of the mirrors!" Then he flatly told me to be silent, and he dragged himself along, crying, "Water! Water!" And his mouth was open as though he were drinking, and my mouth was open too as though I were drinking. For we not only saw the water, but we heard it. We heard it flow. We heard it ripple. Do you understand that word? Ripple. It is a sound which you hear with your tongue. You put your tongue out of your mouth to listen to it better. So there we were, putting out our tongues and dragging ourselves towards the rippling river bank. Our eyes and ears were full of water, but our tongues were dry and hard as horn. When we reached the mirror, Monsieur de Chagny licked it, and I also licked the glass. It was burning hot. Then we rolled on the floor with a hoarse cry of despair. Monsieur de Chagny put the one pistol that was still loaded to his temple, and I stared at the Punjab lasso at the foot of the iron tree. The iron tree was waiting for me. But as I stared at the Punjab lasso, I saw a thing that made me start so violently that Monsieur de Chagny delayed his attempt at suicide. I caught the pistol from him, and then I dragged myself on my knees towards what I had seen. I had discovered in a groove in the floor a black-headed nail.
Jack Klaff was reading from The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. The producer was Harriet Lang. And you can hear episode 9 at the same time tomorrow evening.
Disoriented and exhausted by their terrible experiences in Eric's torture chamber and a succession of extraordinary illusions, Raoul and the Persian have come close to committing suicide. About to hang himself from the iron tree with the Punjab lasso, the Persian suddenly discovers a possible means of escape and a chance to rescue Christine from the monster's clutches.
Almost dead from heat and thirst, I had discovered in a groove in the floor of the torture chamber a black-headed nail whose use I knew, continued the Persian. At last, I had found the spring. I felt the nail. I lifted a radiant face to Monsieur de Chagny. The nail yielded to my pressure, and then we saw not a door opening in the wall, but a cellar flap released in the floor. Cool air came up to us from the black hole below. We stooped over that square of darkness as though over a limpid well. With our chins in the cool shade, we drank it in, and we bent lower and lower over the trapdoor. What could be there in that cellar which opened before us? Water. Water to drink. I thrust my arm into the darkness and came upon a stone, and another stone. A staircase, a dark staircase leading into the cellar. The Viscount wanted to fling himself down the hole, but I, fearing a new trick of the monsters, stopped him, turned on my dark lantern, and went down first. The staircase was a winding one and led down into pitchy darkness. But oh, how deliciously cool were the darkness and the stairs. The lake could not be far away. We soon reached the bottom. Our eyes were beginning to accustom themselves to the dark, to distinguish shapes around us, circular shapes, on which I turned the light of my lantern. Barrels. We were in Eric's cellar. It was here that he must keep his wine, and perhaps his drinking water. I knew that Eric was a great lover of good wine. Oh, there was plenty to drink here. The barrels were symmetrically arranged in 2 rows, one on either side of us. They were small barrels, and I thought that Eric must have selected them of that size to facilitate their carriage to the house on the lake. We examined them successively to see if one of them had not a funnel showing that it had been tapped at some time or another, but all the barrels were hermetically sealed. Then, after half lifting one to make sure it was full, we dropped to our knees, and with the blade of a small knife which I carried, I prepared to stave in the bunghole. Monsieur de Chagny put his two hands together underneath it, and I burst it.
"What's this?"
cried the Viscount. "This isn't water." The Viscount put his two full hands close to my lantern. I stooped to look, and at the same moment flung away the lantern with such violence that it broke and went out, leaving us in utter darkness. What I had seen in Monsieur de Chagny's hands was gunpowder. The discovery put us into a state of alarm that made us forget all our past and present sufferings. We now knew what the monster meant to convey when he said to Christine Drouet, yes or no, and if the answer were no, everybody would be dead and buried. Yes, buried under the ruins of the Paris Opera House. The monster had given her until 11 o'clock in the evening. He had chosen his time well. There would be many people up there, many of the human race in the brilliant theatre. What finer attendance could he expect at his funeral? He would go down to the tomb, escorted by the whitest shoulders in the world, decked with the richest jewels. 11 o'clock tomorrow evening. We were all to be blown up in the middle of the performance if Christine Drouet said no. 11 o'clock tomorrow evening, and what else could Christine say but no? Would she not prefer to espouse death itself rather than that living corpse? She did not know that on her acceptance or refusal depended the awful fate of so many. 11 o'clock tomorrow evening. We dragged ourselves through the darkness, feeling our way to the stone steps, for the light in the trapdoor overhead that led to the room of mirrors was now extinguished. At last I found the staircase, but suddenly I drew myself up on the first step, for a terrible thought had come to my mind. "What is the time?" I asked. Yes, what was the time? For after all, 11 o'clock tomorrow evening might be now, might be this very moment. Who could tell us the time? We seemed to have been imprisoned in that hell for days and days, for years, since the beginning of the world. Perhaps we should be blown up then and there. Ah, a sound. A crack. Did you hear that? There, in the corner. Good heaven, like a sound of machinery. Again. Oh, for a light. I tell you, a cracking sound. Are you deaf? Monsieur de Chagny and I began to yell like madmen. Fear spurred us on. We rushed up the treads of the staircase, stumbling as we went, anything to escape the dark, to return to the mortal light of the room of mirrors. We found the trapdoor still open, but it was now as dark in the room of mirrors as in the cellar which we had left. We dragged ourselves along the floor of the torture chamber, the floor between us and the powder magazine. What was the time? We shouted, we called out, Monsieur de Chagny to Christine, I to Eric. I reminded him that I had saved his life, but no answer save the echoing cry of our despair. We tried to calculate the time which we had spent there, but we were incapable of reasoning. If only we could see the face of a watch. Mine had stopped, but Monsieur de Chagny's was still going. He told me that he had wound it up before dressing for the opera. We had not a match upon us, and yet we must know. Monsieur de Chagny broke the glass of his watch and felt the two hands. He questioned the hands of his watch with his fingertips, going by the position of the ring of the watch. Judging by the space between the hands, he thought it might be just 11 o'clock. But perhaps it was not the 11 o'clock of which we stood in dread. Perhaps we had still 12 hours before us. "Shh!" I exclaimed suddenly. Footsteps in the next room. Someone tapped against the wall. Christine's voice said, "Raoul! Raoul!" We now all began to talk at once, on either side of the wall. Christine sobbed. The monster had been terrible, it seemed, had done nothing but rave, waiting for her to give him the yes, which she refused. Finally, after hours and hours of that hell, he had, this moment, gone out, leaving her alone to reflect. "What is the time now?" Monsieur de Chagny asked. 11 o'clock, all but 5 minutes. "But which 11 o'clock?" "The 11 o'clock that is to decide life or death. He told me so before he went. Here," he said, offering me a key. "Here is the key that opens the 2 ebony caskets on the mantelpiece in the room next to the torture chamber. In one of the caskets you will find a scorpion, in the other a grasshopper, both very cleverly done in Japanese bronze. They will say yes or no for you. If you turn the scorpion, I shall understand when I come back that you have said yes. The grasshopper will mean no." And he laughed
like a drunken demon, and left me. His last words were, "The grasshopper, mind the grasshopper. The grasshopper not only turns, it hops, and it hops extremely high." "Oh, Raoul," she said, "the caskets are there on the mantelpiece." I had sufficient lucidity left to understand that if the grasshopper were turned, it would hop, and with it many members of the human race. There was no doubt that the grasshopper controlled an electric current intended to blow up the powder magazine. Monsieur de Chagny explained the situation to Christine in a few hurried words, and told her to turn the scorpion at once. There was a pause. "Christine!" I cried. "Where are you?" "By the scorpion." "Don't touch it!" The idea had come to me, for I knew my Eric, that the monster had deceived the girl once more. Perhaps it was the scorpion that would blow everything up. After all, why was he not there to hear her answer? Perhaps he had taken shelter and was waiting for the explosion. "Here he comes," cried Christine. "I hear him. Here he is." We heard his steps. He went up to Christine, but did not speak. Then I raised my voice. "Eric, it is I. Do you know me?"
"So, you're not dead in there. Well then, keep quiet."
I tried to speak, but he said coldly,
"Not a word, Daroga, or I shall blow everything up."
And he added,
"The honor rests with Mademoiselle. Mademoiselle has not touched the scorpion."
How deliberately he spoke.
"Mademoiselle has not touched the grasshopper."
With what composure.
"But it is not too late to do the right thing. There. I open the caskets without a key, for I open and shut what I please and as I please. Look at the little dears inside. Aren't they pretty? If you turn the grasshopper, mademoiselle, we shall all be blown up. There is enough gunpowder under our feet to blow up a whole section of Paris. If you turn the scorpion, mademoiselle, all that powder will be soaked and drowned. Mademoiselle, to celebrate our wedding, you shall make a very handsome present to several 100 Parisians who are at this moment applauding a poor masterpiece of Meyerbeer. You shall make them a present of their lives."
A pause. And then,
"If in 2 minutes, mademoiselle, you have not turned the scorpion, I shall turn the grasshopper, and the grasshopper hops extremely high."
The terrible silence began anew. The Vicomte de Chagny, realizing that there was nothing left to do but pray, went down on his knees. As for me, my blood beat so fiercely that I had to take my heart in both hands, lest it should burst. At last we heard Eric's voice.
"The 2 minutes are past. Goodbye, mademoiselle. Hop, grasshopper."
"Eric!" cried Christine.
"Eric!"
I was crying out in concert with Christine. Monsieur de Chagny was still on his knees, praying.
"Eric, I have turned the scorpion."
Oh, the seconds through which we passed, waiting to find ourselves in fragments amid the roar and the ruins. Feeling something crack beneath our feet, hearing an appalling hiss through the open trapdoor, a hiss like the first sound of a rocket. It came softly at first, then louder, then very loud, but it was not the hiss of fire. It was more like the hiss of water, and now it became a gurgling sound. Gurgle, gurgle. We rushed to the trapdoor. All our thirst, which had vanished when the terror came, now returned with the lapping of the water. The water rose in the cellar above the powder barrels, and we went down to it with parched throats. It rose to our chins, to our mouths, and we drank. We stood on the floor of the cellar, and we drank. And we went up the stairs again in the dark, step by step, went up with the water. The water came out of the cellar with us and spread over the floor. The floor of the torture chamber became a lake in which our feet splashed. "Eric! Eric! That is water enough!" I said.
But Eric did not reply. We heard nothing but the water rising. It was halfway up to our waists. "Christine!" cried Monsieur de Chagny. "Christine! The water's up to our knees!" But Christine did not reply. We heard nothing but the water rising. We were all alone in the dark, with a dark water that seized us and clasped us and froze us. By this time we had lost our foothold, and were spinning around in the water, carried away by an irresistible whirl, for the water turned with us and dashed us against the dark mirrors, which thrust us back again. "Eric! Eric!" I cried. "I saved your life. Remember, you were sentenced to death. But for me, you would be dead. Eric!" We whirled round like so much wreckage, and the water rose higher. Already we could hardly breathe, the dark air above the dark water, the air which we could hear escaping through some vent-hole. We whirled round. We began to sink. One last effort, one last try. "Eric! Christine!" Gurgle, gurgle, gurgle in our ears. Gurgle, gurgle. At the bottom of the dark water, the last sound our ears heard was the gurgling of the rushing water.
The previous chapter marks the conclusion of the written narrative which the Persian left behind. I, Gaston Leroux, heard the rest of the story from his own lips. When he recovered consciousness, opened his eyes, and realized that he had not drowned in the torture chamber, the Persian found himself lying on a bed. Monsieur de Chagny was asleep on a sofa. An angel and a devil were watching over them. After the deceptions and illusions of the torture chamber, that quiet little room seemed invented for the express purpose of once more puzzling the mind of the mortal rash enough to stray into the abode of living nightmare. The wooden bedstead, the chest of drawers, the brasses, the beeswaxed mahogany chairs, the little square antimacassars carefully placed on the backs of the chairs, the clock on the mantelpiece, and the harmless-looking ebony caskets at either end, this collection of ugly, peaceable, reasonable furniture at the bottom of the opera cellars bewildered the imagination more than all the recent fantastic happenings. And the figure of the masked man seemed all the more formidable in this old-fashioned, neat and trim little setting. It bent down over the Persian and said in his ear, "Are you better, Daroga? You're looking at my furniture. It is all I have left of my poor mother." Christine Daae did not say a word. She moved about noiselessly like a sister of charity who had taken a vow of silence. She brought a cup of cordial. Eric took it from her hand, poured a drop of rum into it, and gave it to the Persian. Pointing to the Viscount, Eric said, "He came to himself long before we knew if you were still alive, Daroga. He's quite well. He's asleep. We must not wake him." Eric left the room, and the Persian raised himself on his elbow, looked around him, and saw Christine Daae sitting by the fireside. He called her, but he was very weak, and fell back on his pillow. Christine came to him, laid her hand on his forehead, and went away again. The Persian noticed that as she went, she did not so much as glance at Monsieur de Chagny, and she sat down again in her chair by the chimney-corner. Eric returned with some little bottles which he placed on the mantelpiece. After sitting down and feeling the Persian's pulse, he said to him, "You are now safe, both of you, and soon I shall take you up to the surface of the earth to please my wife." Thereupon he rose and disappeared without further explanation. The Persian again looked at Christine's quiet profile under the lamp. She was reading a tiny book with gilt edges, like a religious book. The Persian still had in his ears the natural tone in which the other had said, "To please my wife." Very gently he called her again, but Christine seemed wrapped in her book. Eric returned, mixed the Persian a draught, and advised him not to speak to his wife again, because it might be very dangerous to everybody's health. Eventually, the Persian fell asleep, like Monsieur de Chagny, and did not wake until he was in his own bedroom, being nursed by his faithful Darius, who told him that on the previous night he had been found propped against the door of his flat, where he had been left by a stranger who rang the bell before going away. As soon as the Persian recovered his strength and his wits, he sent to Count Philippe de Chagny's house to inquire after Raoul's health. The answer was that the young man had not been seen and that Count Philippe was dead. His body had been found on the bank of the Opera Lake. The Persian remembered a certain conversation which he had heard from behind the wall of the torture chamber and had no doubt regarding the crime and the criminal. Knowing Eric as he did, the Persian easily reconstructed the tragedy. Thinking that his brother had run away with Christine Dooy, Philippe must have dashed in pursuit of him along the Brussels road, where he knew that everything was prepared for the elopement. Failing to find the pair, he had hurried back to the opera, remembered Raoul's strange confidences about his fantastic rival, and had learned that Raoul had disappeared, leaving his hat in the prima donna's dressing room beside an empty pistol case. The Count, convinced of his younger brother's insanity, somehow found a way into that infernal underground maze. He must have made his way to the house on the lake, rung the bell, and paid the penalty. The Persian did not hesitate. He determined to inform the police. The case was in the hands of an examining magistrate called Faure, a person with a mind utterly unprepared to receive a confidence of this kind. As the police did not want his evidence, perhaps the press would be glad of it. The Persian sat down to write, and he had just written the last line of the narrative which has been quoted, when Darius announced the visit of a stranger who refused to give his name, would not show his face, and who had declared simply that he did not intend to leave the place until he had spoken to the daroga. The Persian ordered him to be shown in. Eric looked extremely weak, and leant against the wall as though afraid of falling. Taking off his hat, he revealed a forehead, white as wax. The rest of the face was hidden by the mask. The Persian rose to his feet as Eric entered.
"Murderer of Count Philippe, what have you done with his brother Raoul and Christine Dooy?"
Eric dragged himself to a chair and heaved a deep sigh. Then, gasping for breath, he said, "Daroga, don't talk to me about Count Philippe. He was dead by the time I left the house by the lake. It was an accident, a very sad accident. He fell very awkwardly, but simply and naturally into the lake."
"You lie!"
shouted the Persian. Eric bowed his head and said, "I've not come here to talk about Count Philippe, but to tell you that I'm going to die."
"Where are Raoul de Chagny and Christine Dooy?"
"Of love, Daroga. I'm dying of love. I loved her so. I love her still. When she let me kiss her, it was the first time, Daroga, I ever kissed a woman."
"Will you tell me if she is alive or dead?"
"Why do you shake me like that?" "Yes, I kissed her on the forehead, and she did not draw back from my lips. She saved your life, Daroga, at a moment when I would not have given tuppence for your Persian skin. What were you there for with that boy? You would have died as well as he. My word, how she entreated me on behalf of her boy. But I told her that as she had turned the scorpion, she had become engaged to me, and that she did not want two men engaged to her. As for you, you did not exist. I tell you, you were going to die with the other. Only when you were yelling like the devil because of the water, Christine came to me with her beautiful blue eyes wide open and swore to me, as she hoped to be saved, that she would be my living wife. It was a bargain. Half a minute later, all the water was back in the lake. I had a hard job with you, Daroga, for upon my honor I thought you were done for. However, there you were. It was understood that I was to take you both up to the surface of the earth. When at last I had disposed of you both, I came back alone.
"What have you done with Vicomte de Chagny?"
insisted the Persian. You see, Daroga, I couldn't carry him up just like that at once. He was a hostage. I chained him up nicely. A whiff of the Mazenderan perfume had left him as limp as a rag in the most remote and deserted part of the opera, below the fifth cellar. Then I went back to Christine. Eric arose solemnly. Then he began to tremble like a leaf. Yes, she was waiting for me, a real, living bride. And when I came forward, more timid than a little child, she did not run away. No, she waited for me. I even believe that she put out her forehead. A little, no, not much, just a little, and I kissed her. And she did not die. Oh, how good it is, Daroga, to kiss a person. My mother, Daroga, my poor, unhappy mother, would never let me kiss her. She would run away and throw me my mask. Nor any other woman, ever. Ever. Oh, you can understand. My happiness was so great, I cried. And I fell at her feet, crying. And I kissed her little feet, crying. You're crying too, Daroga. And she also cried. The angel cried. Yes, Daroga. I felt her tears flow on my forehead. They were hot. They were sweet. They trickled under my mask. They mingled with the tears in my eyes. They flowed between my lips. Listen, Daroga, listen to what I did. I tore off my mask so as not to lose one of her tears, and she did not run away. She remained, weeping over me, with me. We cried together. I've tasted all the happiness the world can offer. And Eric fell into a chair, choking for breath, while I was at her feet. I heard her say, "Poor, unhappy Eric," and she took my hand. I'd become no more, you know, than a poor dog ready to die for her. I mean it, Daroga. I held in my hand a ring, a plain gold ring which I had given her, which she had lost, and which I had found again. I slipped it into her little hand and said, "There, take it. I know you love the boy. Don't cry any more." She asked me in a very soft voice what I meant, and then I made her understand that I was only a poor dog ready to die for her, and that she should marry the young man, because she had cried with me and mingled her tears with mine. Eric's emotion was so great that he had to tell the Persian not to look at him, for he was choking and must take off his mask. I went and released the young man and told him to come with me to Christine. They kissed before me. Then Christine kissed me for the first time, herself, here on the forehead. Don't look, Daroga. Here, on the forehead. My forehead. And they went off together. And Christine had stopped crying. I cried alone. The monster resumed his mask and collected his strength to leave the Persian. He told him that, when he felt his end to be close at hand, he would send him the things that he held dearest in the world, a pair of gloves, a shoe buckle, and 2 pocket handkerchiefs. All Christine Doye's. In reply to the Persian's question, Eric told him that the young people, as soon as they found themselves free, had resolved to go and look for a priest in some lonely spot where they could hide their happiness, and that with this object in view they had started from the Gare du Nord. Lastly, Eric relied on the Persian, as soon as he received the promised relics, to inform the young couple of his death, and to advertise it in the Epoque. That was all. The Persian saw Eric to the door of his flat, and Darius helped him down to the street. A cab was waiting for him. Eric stepped in. The Persian, who had gone to the window, heard him say to the driver, "Go to the opera," and the cab drove off into the night. The next day the Persian ascertained that Madame Valerius had disappeared at about the same time as the young couple. He surmised that all three had withdrawn far from the world, to enjoy a happiness which they would not have cared to make public after the inexplicable death of Count Philippe. 3 weeks later, the Epoque published this announcement: Eric is dead.